In this position, it looks very natural for the white king to just go to c3 and then b4 and take the pawn, right? Wherever the pawn goes. But it's actually going to be a draw. The reason is simple. After king c3, black will sacrifice the pawn by going to a3. And if you take the pawn in a, then the black king will be able to go and find a shelter in the last corner square, and you can't promote, as we all know. And even if you want to play like pawn to b4, for example, then black will just go down, and then you're forced to go to b2, but then king e5, and you're gonna have to take the pawn at some point. King d5, king b3, king c6, and it's just too late. You're gonna go c4, but now the black king goes to b6, and you cannot do the opposition ever because you have a pawn, and so this is a draw. So in this position, white has to play king to b1. The reason is simple. After a3, well, okay, black can't really play anything else because then simply king a2, and then we can take the pawn. And we're going to keep the king on the a file, meaning that the pawn on the b file will always be protected. So after a3, b3, very important, because we need to have our king in front of our pawn so we can do the opposition. King e5, king a2, king d5, king takes pawn, king c5, king a4, and whatever, we're going to win the opposition. So the king goes to b6, then we win the game like this. And if you go somewhere else, then you just keep going. In this position, it looks natural to go to f5 with the king because our king is closer to the opponent pawn, so we know we're gonna win it for sure. But that gives black too many tempos, and like king f6, but then king d4. And at some point, whenever you take the pawn in f7, the black king will be close enough to our pawn, and it's gonna be a draw. So the solution here is very simple. It's an opposition. So king to d4, preventing the king from accessing the area of the board where there are the pawns. So after king b5, then king d5, king b6, king d6, still preventing the king from accessing the pawns. If black pushes the pawn, let's say f5, then play f4. Now the black king has to move wherever he moves, let's say b5, then you can go back to d5. In this scenario though, you're going to be able to take the pawn and then play king to g6 and promote the white pawn. If the black player hadn't pushed the pawn, for example, it wouldn't have made any difference because eventually we're going to go up and then just switch side. In this last example, it becomes very clear how important it is to be able to move the king. These two pawns look very threatening, and it looks very natural to believe that these two pawns will either promote and maybe even win, or black will simply be able to force a sacrifice and then it's going to be a draw. In reality, white wins. King to d2. The idea, of course, is to go around towards the pawn. So g2, for example, loses immediately after king e3. The pawn cannot promote. This pawn can't push because both pawns will be taken. So after king to d2, what happens after f2? Immediately attacking the rook. White plays the incredible rook to d1. The idea is to give a discover check and then be able to take the pawns. So if black pushes the pawn and we can take it straight away, g2 does nothing because we're going to take it in 2 moves. The white player is just going to go to e2 and then f3. If black pushes the pawn, then this is discover check. And after the king moves, we're going to take the pawn.